Barry SLAUENWHITE is my guest. He's the president of Compassion Canada. He's got a great book out. I think this is one of the most important books when it comes to mission strategy. You called the book, Barry, Strategic Compassion. Why that name?
I thought you would ask that. Because so much of what we as Christians have been doing in our attempts to alleviate or fight against poverty have really been sporadic. We've been a little bit here, a little bit there. You know, I go into most churches and I see on their walls all the different things they're funding in missions, and all great things. Mm-hmm. And I ask the question, so if you're spreading that thin, how do you judge, how do you gauge the impact at the end of a given time, 5 years, 10 years, whatever? So my call to the church, my call to the individual Christian is to be strategic, to be thoughtful, do your homework, look at what you believe the scripture is saying about poverty. What is God directing you to? And then put a plan together so that at the end of any time frame, you can look at the impact. So strategic, we all want to be compassionate. That word's expected. But strategic compassion is really, really important.
You've had the unique privilege of being with this great organization for 35 years. So you probably have kids that you met along the way that are like in their 40s.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe even more.
I was just in Haiti in August, and we celebrated Compassion Haiti's 50th anniversary. Most of the adults, most of the church leaders that were present and taking part were once Compassion children. And they're in all walks of life, but especially in the church. There's some research done recently that says that 90% of all the churches in Haiti have a Compassion graduate in some form of leadership, either pastor, on the elders board, youth group leader, or whatever.
So we talked earlier, Barry, about the dichotomy, between the good works and the good news. An honest reading of the Bible, the teachings of Jesus, he did both. He met physical needs, but he also talked about eternal life.
I love to tell people, Jesus had the largest feeding program known to history. He was the most renowned and still is the most famous medical doctor the world has ever known. He was and is known as the greatest teacher. But all of those things are not the reason he came to earth. They're not part of the incarnational strategy. Jesus came to earth for one reason. He says it himself, to bring the good news of the gospel. So why then did he have this massive feeding program? Because the people he loved and cared about were hungry. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. That was not his strategy. His strategy was the gospel. But because he loved the people, as we ought to love the people we minister to, we care for their needs. So you can't separate the gospel and the needs of hurting mankind.
I remember being years ago, meeting you for the first time in Edmonton. You were speaking at Missions Fest out there.
Yes.
And you're talking to the pastors. And I remember you talking, and something that just still resonates in my mind is that Jesus, the poverty was how the message would get in there. And we have to have that same approach. Poverty gives us an opportunity to present this amazing message.
Well, look at the early church. The early church had phenomenal and rapid growth. But if you take it apart and you dissect it, most of it was because of the needs people had, either the needs of poverty, because the world in which Jesus grew up in was basically a developing world.
Right. Yes.
It was as bad as anything we see on the mission field. But the early Christians stepped into that and helped people and cared for people. And that opened doors for them to talk about Jesus. And so people were caring for one another practically. They were sharing about the good news of Jesus. And that resulted in people coming to Christ in droves. So the church grew like a hockey stick, like this.
I love your book. It's so practical, but I especially love the stories.
Yeah.
Somebody, a little child, little girl, little boy, they've got no hope.
Yeah.
I was getting emotional on that. But you come in, you bring them hope, they go to school, and they make something of their lives. I mean, for you, Barry, that's got to be your legacy, man.
I tell you, I've had the privilege of meeting thousands of these children. many of them after they've graduated. And wow, it just blesses my heart to see what God has done.
Yeah.
And you know, the real credit doesn't go to Compassion. The real credit goes to the local church that we partner with and the men and women who give sacrificially to invest in these children. And we as the sponsor, you and I as sponsors, we help facilitate that. The organization Compassion is the bridge that puts that together, but the local church does the ministry to the children and leads them to Christ. And as I said to you before we talked, every day about 500 children and young adults come to faith in Jesus Christ.
That's the most impressive statistic. Now, Barry, 35 years you've been doing this, president of Compassion. You've seen exponential growth. It's amazing. You're going to retire. Or should I say you're going to do something different?
Retirement's not a good word.
No, not in the Bible.
And it's not in the
there?
Bible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to redeploy myself, if you will. I'm going to step out of the CEO role, the president CEO role, and step into more of an ambassador role. I'm going to work part-time with Compassion, continuing on where my passion is. And I'm going to be in churches, at missions conferences, doing some more writing, and keeping that voice for the poor always loud.
Well, Barry SLAUENWHITE, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for this great book. And again, I would encourage groups that are looking at doing any kind of mission group work, because you have really set a precedent, I think, in how to do missions, to keep the things together, the spiritual and then also the good work. So thank you, Merry Christmas, and we'll look forward to seeing you in your different role.
All right, I'll keep you that.
Okay, and we'll have more of 100 Huntley Street right after this.